Whoa, stop. I think it's time for some new music, right? Yeah, welcome to week 28. It is week 28. It's been a good week. I've trained the usual amount of hours that I'm trying to do now, which is between 9 and 10 hours. I think I've done something along the lines of 9 hours and 30 minutes. And I swam 3 times. Runs weren't overly successful. I tried to do a brick session off the bike yesterday. My knee wasn't having any of it yesterday, but I did 45 minutes on the treadmill. I've done a couple of turbo sessions. I've ridden into work and back. Yeah, generally speaking, it's been a good week. I've managed to get the 2 weeks of intensity that I've been intending in, and that means that next week's a recovery week. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about recovery and that kind of stuff in just a minute, because I think that's an important thing to think about. What else has happened? I've eaten well. Went out for a meal with Becky last night and had something quite nice to eat, but generally speaking, I've been pretty well behaved. The one thing I have noticed as well this week, alongside the recovery stuff I want to talk about in a minute, is the amount of water that I've been consuming over the last couple of weeks has been quite astonishing. So I'd like to talk about some of the stuff I've discovered about hydration. I know we all know the importance about it, but actually I think there's some really important stuff that I've found out which I'd like to pass on, along with just discussing recovery briefly. My body weight's continued to come down. I'm now at 95 kilos. I know that will slow down a little bit next week with the lack of volume that I'm putting in next week, and I hope that the continued good food will carry on. It is one thing I've got to be a bit careful with now, is that the routine has changed now that I've finished at university. I'm not going to be going through the same routine of working each day that I have been the last couple of weeks, which has really helped. So I've got some plans in place over Christmas. I've got set days when I can have good things, rather than it just being a massive kind of best bet, pretty much 3-week free-for-all in terms of cheese, chocolate, crisps and anything that I like, fizzy drinks and everything else. What I'm going to do is set aside certain days or certain times of day on certain days that I can have certain things, just to try and keep that routine in there to some degree, because I've made so much progress over the last couple of weeks. I don't want to ruin that. So the weight's come down. I'm at 95 kilos now, and my CTL has gone up. Last week it was at 31 CTL. I kind of explained that in week 27, so if you don't really know much about what CTL is with Training Peaks, I've explained that briefly in last week's video. But my CTL's gone up 5 points, up to 36. That won't increase as much next week again because of the lack of volume that I'll be putting in. But ultimately, what I wanted to do, which was to get my CTL up and my weight down, that's exactly where I wanted to be in terms of my process goals, my weekly process goal. I hit my hours, I've eaten well, my CTL's gone up, my weight's come down. Couldn't ask for more, really. So next week is a recovery week for me. I do this in blocks of 6 weeks, where every 3rd week and every 6th week I have a recovery week where I reduce the volume in terms of how much training I do. I try and keep the intensity up, but I don't do as much of it as I do, pretty much as you would do with a taper pre-race. And I think a lot of people think about the training they do is where they make the improvements in their athletic performance. But actually, what we're doing is we're causing stress on our bodies when we train. We're actually getting worse at what we're doing. It's fatigue and everything else kicks in, muscle breaks down in terms of the amount of glycogen that we have in our bodies and everything else. We're actually running ourselves down and getting worse at stuff when we're actually training quite hard. So what we actually need to do when we're training is give ourselves a chance to kind of recover. And I find for myself and most of the people that I work with that every third week is a good time to take a bit of stock and just kind of take that recovery. A good kind of visual way of thinking about this, anyone that's got kids under the age of 10 will know what one of these is. It's a squishy. It's kind of like one of those stress balls that the executives used to use in the 80s, but I'm going to try and kind of explain to you kind of what I'm talking about with the aid of this my 9-year-old squishy's toy here. So when we're training, if we start at this kind of level, as we train, we're actually kind of compressing ourselves into a kind of smaller and smaller ball. So we end up kind of really reducing our kind of capacity to do things to this point here. And that recovery allows us to kind of just re-expand out and soak up all the hard training that we've done, really, so that we can kind of come back. But the thing is, when we do come back after a good block of training, when we've kind of done this repeatedly, what eventually happens is we go back and we do this again, and we recover and we kind of build up and soak up all that training again and grow back out. And what eventually happens is that actually we don't stay like this. What happens is our body responds to the stress that we put under it, and eventually we kind of put our body under stress, and it comes back being considerably bigger the next time. So we've actually kind of increased our ability to take on speed, volume, and all those other things. But we need to have that recovery week to allow ourselves to kind of soak up all that training that we've done. So actually it's in the recovery weeks that we make our improvements, not during our really intensive weeks. We're actually grinding ourselves down then. We're making ourselves worse at what we do. The recovery week is actually where we get fitter, stronger, and faster. I'm pretty sure we all know the importance of this stuff. I'm not talking about bidons or water bottles, I'm talking more about the stuff that's in it. I know we all know we need to hydrate more, that we need to drink more, but I've been doing a bit of research into kind of water and athletic performance, because I've found myself over the last couple of weeks drinking tons of water. When I've been eating properly and training harder, I have been absolutely caning the water. So I've done a little bit of research. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to give you some brief tips and interesting things. But I found last week the longer video was a little bit too long perhaps, and I'm trying to cut this down a little bit. During the week, now that I'm finished from university teaching, I'm going to do a longer video each week kind of explaining some of these things in more detail. So I'm going to hit you up with a few more kind of quick facts about water. So we are, as beings, kind of made up of 7/10 water. So 70% of our bodies are made up of water. That water is kept in our blood plasma and in our organs and everywhere else. But yeah, a majority of us is made up of water. So that means at the moment I'm 95 kilos, that 66.5 kilos of me is actually water. And we need to maintain that. The reason we need to maintain that is that losing 1 to 2% of our body water actually triggers our thirst mechanism. We need to replace that water as soon as we can. That means for my size, that's only 1.3 kilos of water that I'd need to sweat out before I'd actually start to hit that 1 to 2%. That's about 3 pounds of sweat. So I'm going to do a little experiment next week using a hour tempo turbo session where I'll weigh myself before and after and see just how much I actually lose. So that 1 to 2% triggers the thirst mechanism, and obviously actually immediately starts to impact on our cognitive, our brain power, our cognitive performance, how much we're actually able to think clearly. So when we're running through transition, trying to remember where we're going or remember our race plan or think about race tactics, that 1 to 2% can have an impact on that. It also has an impact on reduced blood volume in terms of blood plasma. So actually transporting that oxygen around our blood to our muscles can be affected, and also can reduce our muscle contractibility, so actual kind of muscular movement gets affected, along with temperature regulation. So if we're racing on hot days or cold days, we're not actually very good at kind of regulating our temperature very well, and therefore that has an impact on our performance. When we get down to 5% body mass dehydration, that actually has a severe impact. That's when you start to see the massive drops in performance. It can actually have a huge impact, up to 30% of performance loss. So that might sound quite dramatic, and it is. If you were able to ride at 300 watts, for example, which would take you quite a lot of effort to get up to an FTP of about 300 watts to be able to ride at 300 watts for an hour, that would take you down to 210 watts. So when you see those catastrophic kind of blow-ups on Ironman races, and so for example Lionel Sanders in Hawaii this year, you see those kind of catastrophic blow-ups, it's kind of understandable that it could all be down to something like dehydration, and in his case it was a nutrition dehydration issue. Also, in terms of run impact, that would take you from a 4-minute kilometre down to a 5:12 kilometre, which is quite a big impact. You'd have to train huge amounts to get down from 5:12 to 4 minutes per kilometre, and simply keeping yourself hydrated during a race situation can have that impact on it. Now, admittedly, 5% is a large amount. So for my body mass, that's about 3.3 kilograms or 7 pounds of water loss that I would be losing to kind of get to that stage. But in hot weather and over long races, that is quite feasible if you forget to kind of rehydrate all of the time. Here's some other little facts for you. Tap water is actually higher regulated in terms of its safety than bottled water. There's nothing wrong with tap water. Filter it if you don't like the taste particularly. But let's kind of do something for the planet as well and ditch the plastic. There's nothing wrong with tap water. It's all we ever drink here. Here's an interesting thing. I'm a massive gulper. When it comes to drinking, I gulp and gulp and gulp water. I'll gulp any drink that I have. It's one of the problems that when I was drinking alcohol that I would just down pints. Actually, sipping water can help increase your retention of water in your body by 6%. So actually sipping it consistently rather than taking massive gulps throughout a race means that you'll actually retain more of that water in your system. Also, I think sometimes we think that when we're swimming, perhaps we don't sweat as much, or perhaps that it's not so important. But the research that I've done actually shows that we sweat just as much in hot environments when we're swimming. So if the pool and the air in the swimming pool is hot, then we are sweating as much possibly as when we're running. So it's important to replace your water when you're swimming as well. And obviously it's something to think about on race day with a wetsuit. You're running from the swim exit to transition in a wetsuit and you're getting hot, then obviously there's going to be sweat loss there. So just a couple of interesting things I found out about water. I'm going to see you back in week 29. It'll be my recovery week, so hopefully I'll have lost a kilo or two over the next week or so, but I definitely expect that to slow down a little bit and my CTL possibly to either remain the same or drop possibly. But anyway, have a good week and I'll see you all in week 29. Captain's log supplemental. I completely forgot to mention that I've entered Cardiff and Swansea triathlons, so my A races are all booked and I'm on the start list. Anyway, adios.